On the 25th of June 1983, 4-year-old Nyleen Marshall vanished while on a trip with her mother and stepfather to Elkhorn Mountains. That day, the Marshalls and several other families travelled to a picnic area in the Helena National Forest. At around 4 p.m, Nyleen, as well as other children, went playing along the banks of a shallow creek. Some of them noticed her talking to an unidentified man in a purple jogging suit. He tried to get her to play Follow the Shadow. He was the last person to be seen with her before she vanished. For 10 days, an extensive search was conducted. However, there was no indication of her whereabouts. The parents were certain that she'd been taken. They also distributed thousands of missing person flyers across the country. On the 27th of November 1985, the Centre for Missing Children received an anonymous call from a man who claimed that he had Nyleen. 2 months later, an organisation called Child Find of America received a typed letter from him. He claimed that he was raising her as his own child and that he now called her Kay. He also claimed that he loved her and was taking good care of her and did not plan on returning her to her parents. Over the next 6 months, Child Find of America received 2 more letters and another 2 phone calls from the man. They came from Madison, Wisconsin. The FBI was able to trace some of the calls to specific phone booths there and Edgerton. However, once it was discovered where the calls came from, they stopped. The letters were also postmarked from the Madison area. The man indicated that he had travelled with Nyleen to several different locations in the country. The unidentified man that had contacted several missing persons agencies claimed that he lived off substantial investments and that he and Nyleen travelled frequently. In June of 1990, authorities received another lead in this case. Nyleen's uncle saw 2 composite sketches for suspects of a man and a woman wanted in another part of the country for a similar incident. He believed he saw them on the first day of the search for Nyleen and thought it may have been related. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office also indicated that Nyleen's stepfather was a person of interest. The case was aired on Unsolved Mysteries on the 21st of November 1990. After the broadcast, a viewer rang the call centre, believing that one of his students was Nyleen. However, when police went to her house, it was discovered that she was actually another missing child, Monica Bonilla. She had been unlawfully removed by her father several years earlier. Shortly after the discovery, she was reunited with her mother. In 1998, investigators looked into the possibility that a 19-year-old Oklahoma woman named Helena was actually Nyleen. She was taken to an Oklahoma hospital to give birth. She was evasive when hospital staff asked questions about her past. One of the employees later saw a re-airing of the broadcast and suspected that she may have been Nyleen. She remembered very little of her childhood and believed that her mother's name was Nyleen. She agreed to have a DNA test and compared that to Nyleen's parents. It was not known what the test results revealed. Sadly, Nyleen's disappearance remains a mystery. Her mother, Nancy, had her life taken in Mexico in 1995, and it's unknown whether this was connected to Nyleen's disappearance. If Nyleen is still alive, she would now be 41. The case remains unsolved. In 1974, 17-year-old Amy Billig lived in the Coconut Grove neighbourhood of Miami, Florida, with her parents Susan and Ned, and a 16-year-old brother Josh. The family had moved there from Oyster Bay, New York 6 years earlier, and Ned owned a local art gallery. She was a student who enjoyed playing the flute and guitar and was thinking about going into acting. At around midday on the 5th of March 1974, she came home from school for lunch. She then decided to hitchhike along Main Highway in Coconut Grove to her father's office, which was less than a mile away, to borrow money from him so she could meet with friends later that day. On her way there, she vanished, never to be seen again. The last people to see her were construction workers and noticed that she was holding out her thumb. A few days later, 16-year-old twins Charles and Larry Glasser claimed to have had her in their possession and demanded $30,000, but police discovered this was not true and arrested them. Investigators interviewed Amy's family, friends and neighbours, but they could not find any trace of her. They never believed she vanished voluntarily. Shortly after she disappeared, the camera was found at the Wildwood exit on the Florida Turnpike, which was handed in to the police. Many of the photos were overexposed, and a few decent ones had no further clue to her whereabouts. 12 days later, Amy's mother Susan received tips that she might have been taken by a motorbike gang called the Outlaws and taken cross-country. She learned that they came through Coconut Grove at the time she went missing. A family friend who had done legal work for the Outlaws arranged a meeting between Amy's parents and two gang members. Although the men claimed to not have seen Amy personally, they confirmed that other gang members have taken other women in the past in exchange for a credit card or a bike. The men promised to ask the other members about Amy, but they were never able to provide any information. Susan soon heard from a woman named Gina Andrew, who had been taken by a biker gang at the age of 12, but she managed to escape 5 years later. She claimed that she'd been sold for money, motorbikes, and biker outfits. 3 months after Amy's disappearance, Susan tracked down the Outlaws to Orlando, 160 miles away. She questioned dozens of people in the area. A convenience store manager remembered seeing Amy being accompanied by at least 2 bikers. The manager recalled that she always bought vegetable soup. This was important because she had been a committed vegetarian. Susan was certain that it was her. However, a year and a half would pass before Susan received another lead. On the 9th of January 1976, a biker named Dave contacted her after seeing a picture of Amy in the newspaper. He claimed that he had Amy in his possession at one time. He agreed to talk to her, but only at his house. He acted nervous while she was there, believing that they had been followed. When shown a clearer picture of Amy, he was certain that the girl was her. He described her as quiet, like a mute. He also described a hidden scar on her body, which Susan never divulged publicly. This made her certain that the girl was Amy. Dave agreed to try and contact the person who he believed had Amy. A few weeks later, he contacted Susan and claimed that she was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They met there and tried searching for her. In June of 1996, they arrived at a tavern and claimed that Amy would be delivered to them. While there, a scuffle broke out and his knees were badly injured. Susan was whisked away and placed in a cab by one of the other bikers. She never saw Dave again, and he blocked her from all contact, fearing for his safety. He did, however, tell her attorney that Amy was in Seattle. In November of 1977, Susan travelled to Seattle, even though she had suffered a heart attack a few months earlier. She frequented bars, tattoo parlours, and motorcycle shops. Several people recognised photos of Amy, describing her as always quiet. Once again, however, she failed to locate her daughter. 18 months later, in the winter of 1979, an anonymous mail caller told Susan that Amy was at a remote truck stop outside of Reno, Nevada, and that she desperately needed help. FBI agents learned that the biker gang had been there briefly, but there's no way to verify if Amy was with them. Years had passed. Then in 1992, Susan was contacted by a private investigator, Virginia Snyder. She and a British investigator were working on a case when they received a tip about Amy. The investigator was in a post office in Falmouth, England, when he was approached by an American biker. He said that he had a girl that he wanted to sell. He said that she was American, from Oyster Bay, and was mute. The description seemed to match Amy. However, he left without showing a picture of her. Susan felt certain that was Amy. Once again, she was unable to find any trace of her. Tragically, the British investigator passed away a year later. Virginia believed that Amy was still alive, that is, if she managed to survive the first few years. Investigators had the opinion that she wouldn't be after all this time. Susan desperately wanted to know what happened to her. Sadly, Ned passed away of lung cancer in 1992. Following Amy's disappearance, her family received multiple harassing phone calls from a man who claimed that she was being held captive by members of a sordid ring. He tormented Susan over 20 years, often calling her through payphones. However, in 1995, he used a cell phone to make harassing calls. FBI agents were finally able to trace the call to a man named Henry Blair, who worked for the US Customs Department. He claimed that his obsessive-compulsive disorder and alcoholism caused him to harass Susan. He later claimed to never have known Amy. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for harassment and lost a suit to Susan, who received a $5 million settlement. Despite claiming not to have known Amy, he was considered a person of interest in the case. In one of Amy's photos, there was a white van, identical in colour and model to the one that he owned in 1974. Also, in her diary, she described a man named Hank. He wanted to take her to South America. At the same time, Blair's job as a customs agent was sending him to Argentina. Interestingly, his nickname is Hank. Officially though, he was not positively linked to her disappearance, and he proclaims his innocence. In December of 1997, the wife of the former Outlaws member Paul Branch said he confessed to her just prior to passing away that Amy had been administered illicit substances. The members then had their way with her and then took her life within hours of grabbing her off the streets. It was claimed that her body was then thrown into the Florida Everglades. The police were able to verify several details of this account. Her camera was found near Wildwood, which would have been on the route the Outlaws took travelling north. Despite the confession, her remains have yet to be found. Some believe the widow contrived the confession to profit from her disappearance. Although Susan accepted the statement from the widow, but Amy's brother Josh doubted the story's credibility. Sadly, Susan passed away on the 7th of June 2005 at the age of 80. She had searched for Amy for over 31 years. To this day, no trace of Amy's ever been found, and the case remains unsolved.